Good afternoon, everyone. I think I've given ample time for anybody else to join. I'm just going to start, especially since the class is being recorded and can be played back at a future time by anybody else. My name is Michael, and we are continuing our series on literature in English. Last week we had explored, we had completed our exploration of the um, elements of literature. And at the tail end of the class, it has come up about how, the question has come up about how these elements of literature applies to all genres of literature as against just prose. So I mentioned that I tried to explain that. I mentioned that in the coming weeks, we'll try to explore that avenue in detail. Essentially, this class is going to be an illustration of the application of the elements of literature, especially with regards to poetry. I have picked out a poem for us to look at, and I hope that at the end of the session, we would be more equipped to identify literature, elements of literature in all genres of literature, especially poetry. Okay, so yeah, without much ado, let me start. I'm hoping that I can share my screen so so you can see at least the poem as I read it. Just a moment, let me see if I can do that. So I'm going to read out the poetry. We are reading Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. Interesting trivia information. Maya Angelou wrote an autobiography. The title is, I believe, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So this is a poem of 6 stanzas, I believe. And we're going to explore this work and identify the difference. We're going to explore this work and identify the different elements of literature hearing. So first of all, I'm going to start by reading out the work, and I'll try to read as best as I can. I'm not such a good poet, but I try my best. Okay. So give me a moment. I'm coming. A free bird leaps on the back of the wing and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom sing through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown but longed for still. And he stood his head on a distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade wind soft through the sighing trees. And the fat worms waiting on a bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown but longed for still, and he tuned his head on a distant hill, but the caged bird sings of freedom. Okay. Just give me a moment. I think somebody is joining.
Michael, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can start the class already.
Okay, yeah, I've already started before, but I just don't know how much was cut. So let me try and summarize what I've done in the past 10 minutes. So I introduced what we'll be doing today. I mentioned in our last class, we had completed our exploration of different elements of literature. And then based on the question that was raised as regards to how to identify elements of literature in the other genres of literature apart from prose, I had said that in the coming classes we explore these elements with regards to the other genres of literature, that is essentially drama and poetry. So today we are going to be looking at a poem, one of the recommended poems for the WAEC 2021-2025 sessions, and we will try to identify the elements of literature therein. And I've mentioned that the poem we'll be reading today is Maya Angelou's Caged Bird. So I am going to try and share my screen. So in that time, if anybody else joins, they can just play back this session later and kind of get a gist of what we are doing. But I'm going to share my screen, and for the benefit of people who are just joining, I will read the poem again, and we can continue with our discussion essentially. Okay, so let me try and share the screen. I don't know if that's. I think I'm still. Can you see my screen? Uh, oh. Hi, Sunday. Can you please give me the opportunity to share my screen? I made you a host so that you can admit people, but apparently I've lost the ability to share my screen. So if you can just toggle the settings so I can share the screen. Thank you.
No, I can't. Can you?
Hello.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I'm trying to make you the host back, but I can't see it.
Okay, just click on my name. If you go on participants, go to participants, click on my name, and it should give you options to make me a host or stuff like that.
Okay, okay, I've done that.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen now. Confirm that you can see my screen, please. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so like I said, we'll be discussing Maya Angelou's Caged Bird, and we'll explore the elements of literature therein. So let me read the poem. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom sing through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown, but longed for, still, and he soon his head on the distant hill, but the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dumb bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown but longs for still, and he's tuned his head on a distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. So apart from literary devices which this poem is riddled with, I'm going to basically focus on the elements of literature hearing and not basically like delve into the poetic devices and stuff like that. That will be discussed in our upcoming classes from next week. But today is about extension of the elements of literature and identifying them in poetry works. So in the course of the past 2 weeks, we have encountered at least 9 elements of literature, which includes um, this includes setting, language, themes, characters, um, uh, uh, language including diction. In the course of this today's session, we are going to try and identify these things in the poem we just read. So let me start with setting. So even though it's a little bit hard to identify, but this poem is set in 2 locations. It's set in 2 places. One is the sky, and this is the figurative setting, because if you remember when we were discussing setting, we said that setting is the place where the literature work is taking place, where the literature work is essentially taking place. So it is the background, the location, the place in time where this work is taking place. So this poem is taking place partly in the sky and partly in a cage in an unknown or undisclosed place. I guess this is our introduction to that not all times are we able to give a name to the setting of a literature work. So sometimes you just know that, oh, this work is set somewhere in Africa, but you cannot for certainty say that this poem is set in Nigeria or Ghana or Angola. Essentially, the idea is to have a place in mind, a mental picture of where this story is set in. So in this case, the mental picture we can have in mind of where the story is set in is partly that of the sky, which we see in the first stanza when the poet writes, "A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream to the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to climb the sky." So this is the first introduction to the first location or the first setting in this poem. The other location of the setting in this poem is identified in the second stanza, where we read that, "But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he's open his throat to sing." So yes, 2 locations we have identified so far. One is the sky and one is the cage. And the importance of these locations we will see later on in the course of the work as we identify the themes and how this plays across in the work. Now, another element of literature that we encounter in the past 2 weeks is character. So we said that all literature works have character, even if it's just one character that is telling the story or one character that the story is being told about. Like every literature work must have a character. So in this case, even though our characters are not named, we identify 2 characters in this poetry. One is a bird in the first stanza, the free bird that's leaping in the sky, and the free bird that is occupying the first location we identified, which is the sky, like the bird that is flying in the sky. The second character is a bird that is tied up in a cage. Now, obviously, this means that there are 2 characters in this poem, and really true, you might find other things that we can term characters, but these are the essential characters in this poetry. Now, if you remember, we said that characters can be flat or round. That is, they might be complex or they might just be just placeholders. So excuse me. And in this case, the two characters we identified are not just flats, they are playing a tangent role in the poetry. The, the poem switches between describing or telling us a story of what's happened in each character with each stanza. And as we go on with our as we elaborate on our discussion, we'll get to see the core differences between these characters. For example, the bird in the first stanza is free, he's flying, the world is his oyster. You can see this overwhelming sense of arrogance and confidence in the way he dares to claim the sky. And then as we go on in the story, in the poem, sorry, we even find where he eventually does claim the sky as he has flown across board, he can do whatever he wants. He actually does whatever he wants. And he feels like, oh, there's nobody else but he and I mean, like this is my own, I own it, I can do whatever I want with it. It shows us the nature of this bird who, for all intents and purposes, is free. However, the second character we encounter in this poem is the bird in the cage. So the bird in the cage is tied up, his wings are clipped. He is almost the exact opposite of the bird we meet in the first stanza. In this case, the bird doesn't know anything except for his cage. He has not left his cage, and in the time that he has been there, he has become so frustrated that he's now angry and furious. We see this in the way that Maya Angelou described his position as someone who can seldom see through his bad of rage. This means that as someone who has been in captivity for a very long time, he can barely see anything apart from how he's angry at his captivity. So in the course of the as we explore the next three stanzas, sorry, we see how each character, the free bird and the bird in captivity, tend to explore themselves or find themselves very constricted in who they are. And we get a feel of how they feel about this. In the third stanza, we read that the cage bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown but longed for, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. This stanza gives us a clear definition of the state of mind of the caged bird. This bird is in captivity and is afraid. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. He doesn't know what tomorrow brings. He has no control over himself or things that happen to him. You can see the extent of loss of his agency in the sense that his wings are clipped, he cannot fly. Even in the cage which he occupies, he is caged there and he cannot fly. His legs are tied, he cannot move around. He is basically subject to the whims and caprices of whoever it is that holds the keys to his cage. Whoever is controlling the cage is controlling every facet of his personality. And at the end of this stanza, we can see only one thing that this bird wants, which is freedom. It will want nothing better than freedom. It wants nothing better than to escape the cage, to be cut out of his bondage, to have his wings unclipped so he can fly. The first bird we encounter, that is a free bird, however, experiences something that is almost opposite of what the bird in captivity is experiencing. We can see the exhilaration, the adrenaline popping through its wings or through it as he experiences pure freedom of how he can fly. He's even imagining of the warm food of the worms he will eat in the morning. He's basically living the life, and we see how the way Maya Angelou juxtaposes these two scenarios in the first, second, third, and fourth stanzas kind of like highlights the differences or the positions of these two characters in the poem. Another element of literature that we can identify in this work is language. I can't believe I didn't start off with this, but obviously this is written in English, which is why I could read it, I could read it with me, and you could understand what is being said. So the language here is English. But apart from the core language, we can also see that the diction, the technicality of the language is not so technical as for someone who is 15-year-old to understand. The words used there are not words that require you consulting a dictionary to understand the basic or simple meaning of the poem. And obviously, the language is English, simple English language. Except for a few words which we think that, okay, someone a certain age cannot understand the literal meaning. Basically, the language is so simple that anybody else can read it and get their literal meanings. Now, the question then becomes the figurative meaning of these words, but that is something I hope that we can explore in the coming minutes. Then plots, the elements of plots. As we identified in our last two classes, plot is one of the elements of literature, and plot is basically the story being told. As I've highlighted the characters in this poem, and then their state of mind and their location, that's their setting, we can sort of like see how this poem progresses. The story starts with the free bird who is flying in the sky, and then progresses to the bird in the cage, and then we get to see the mental state of the bird in the cage, and then we see the mental state of the bird that is flying in the sky, and we can see how each bird is yearning for something, how each bird is looking off for something else, and sort of like this. The poem is basically about how these two birds exist in two very different time zones, in two very different locations and settings, and hence want very different things. The bird communicates in we don't know whether each bird gets what they want, but we get this feeling that, oh, they are stuck in the scenario or in the setting where the poem started out from. That is basically the plot of the story. That is the gist of the story, what the story is basically about. So we can see in the plot that there's a beginning. The beginning was the first stanza, which introduces us to the free bird, and then we progressed over time to what these birds wanted, and then culminated in how they are fixed or stuck in their circumstances. We see the conflict here being the difference between what each bird wants, and I think this is something that I want to explore further in the team before we close this session today. But essentially, there's a conflict in regards to the position or the state of mind of each bird and where they are at each point that the poem zeroes in on them. Yes. Another element that is what's exploring is the mood. So the overwhelming mood of this poem is some sort of fondness or sadness. If you read it depends on the standard you're reading. The first, the third, and then the last and the fourth, fifth stanza are happy because it basically describes the state of mind of this free bird who is free and experiencing living the best of his life. But when you juxtapose this with the situation that the caged bird is in, you encounter this overwhelming sense of sadness. There is this sadness about how the caged bird is in a cage and it cannot free itself for any reason. Like it is basically stuck here for as long as it exists. The overwhelming mood is sadness. The next element we should look at is the point of view. As I discussed in the last session, this point of view is basically you identifying who's telling the story and how this story is being told. So first of all, the narrator is a third person ominous being that we don't know. We don't know who this narrator is. It's basically the voice of the poet, but this narrator is able to see the free bird and the caged bird at any given point in time. So that gives us the impression that this is a third person omniscient being that can see everything, that can hear anything, that can even see the thoughts or the feelings of the characters who had the birds. Now, the point of view is basically a third person because this story is being told from the third person ominous being that is perceiving everything. We are not reading this poem from the perception of free bird or the caged bird only. We get to see different sides of the coin, and we even get to see how they feel about what they are experiencing. That's the birds. So this means that this poem is written in a third person point of view, third person omniscient point of view. The next element of literature that we should explore is the conflicts. As I mentioned earlier, the conflict is the fact that these two birds exist in almost different uh, settings, two different locations, and in very different states of mind. The position of the free bird is almost antithetical to the position of the caged bird. And this is the conflict. As you see, on one hand, somebody's enjoying unlimited, unwarranted freedom, and on the other hand, we see somebody experiencing a bondage. And we can, even though we don't get a view of as to what is happening here, or why each bird is in the situation where it is, you can see how what they want and in the position they currently occupy is conflicting with each other. Now let's use the remainder of this session to explore the themes and then the use of the literary elements to explore these themes. So first of all, I should start by mentioning that the use of birds here is merely figurative by Angelou to allude to the real subjects or the real characters of this poem. It's my understanding that this poem was written to deal with racial oppression and freedom as regards to people of color, African Americans in the United States of America at a certain point in time. Now, bird in this case was used to highlight how integral flying, how integral living in the sky is for a bird. If anybody that once you think of a bird, you think the sky, you think of flying, you think of wings, you think of how they fly around, how they eat worms. And I think Mayangeli used a bird as a character here to highlight how something as integral, as important as freedom has been taken away from this bird in the way that its wings are clipped and his feet are tied up. Now, she doesn't go as expressive to say that, oh, this is about black people, or this is about men, or this is about women, but and that's the beauty of poetry. The beauty of poetry is that you're able to read meaning into it and maybe apply to different scenarios. But the core idea here is how something that is integral, how freedom, which is very, very important to all life forms, all beings, especially birds, when it comes to their freedom to fly, has been taken away from one and retained to another. Now, this leads, if you wish to see how this like plays out, you see how she uses oppression here, in the sense that the second stanza that talks about the caged bird and how its wings are clipped and its feet are tied. This means that somebody must have put that bird in the cage. Somebody tied the bird's leg. Somebody clipped its wings. Somebody's made sure that it's not able to escape from that cage. And this is oppressive in the sense that the bird wants freedom. Like the bird needs freedom. It needs to eat to survive. It needs to go out on its own. It needs to be able to feed. And the the limitation on it to not do this thing is an oppression. Now, if you now juxtapose the position of the two birds in question, that is the free bird and then the caged bird, you will see where racial oppression comes into place. You see racial disparity in the sense that the free bird is an illustration or a figurative representation of the white person in America, and then the caged bird is a figurative representation of black people in America, in the sense that black people, upon their community existence, they are eminently clipped, like their wings are clipped. There's only so much you can do. There's a glass ceiling, and the ceiling is that, oh, you can't go beyond here. And it is the poem tries to capture how frustrating this is for black people in the second stanza, the last line of the second stanza, where it says, let me just read from the third line. So his wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. Essentially, this is saying that because the bird cannot do anything else except just cry out in pain, it just sings, it just shouts, it just screams. Essentially, this was at a point where Black people, we are basically calling out for attention, calling out for how the society is unjustly structured against them, and crying for justice. So Maya Angelou uses the bird here as an allegory to illustrate how there's racial disparity in America and how important it is to identify this disparity and see how, on one hand, white people are experiencing unbound freedom. On the other hand, you have another group of people who are experiencing racial and systematic restrictions as to how they can exist. Now, um, the last stanza, it's a repetition, almost a repetition of the third stanza, right? But then you see on the fifth stanza that, but a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are claimed and his feet are tied, so he opens his trunk to sing. Essentially, this caged bird dreams of freedom. It knows that it should be free, it should be able to fly, and it can almost imagine what it would do if it could fly. It can almost imagine what it should do, it wants to do when it's able to move around and fly around and like be able to feed on its own, to catch its own worms, to do whatever it wants. But because it is caged, it can only dream. He can only dream of what he wants to do. He can only dream of the kind of nest he wants to build. He can only dream of the kind of eggs or how he can raise his children if he eventually has children. Now, this is another illustration as a figurative pointer as to how the lives of Black people were at the point in time, especially it's still ongoing given the current circumstances of the current state of events. Essentially, Black people have to live in a grave of dreams of things they could have done, but they cannot accomplish, or things they wanted to do, but they cannot accomplish because the system is structured against them. So yes, that is basically the themes of this poem, which is racial oppression and racial injustice, and yeah, that's basically it. I believe I have identified all 9 elements of literature in this case. I don't know if we followed so far. If there are any questions, as the class is going to be coming to an end very soon. We identify the elements of setting, language, mood, characters, point of view, narrator, themes. So I believe we have explored these elements sufficiently. But if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and ask. So by any question, we might be ending this class very soon. Yeah. Um, And this was just to highlight the elements of literature. So in the next class, we'll be looking at devices, literary devices, especially poetic devices as it comes into play in analyzing literature works. I will give out an assignment after this class later today, and I hope you'll be ready to discuss in the coming week as we delve in proper to into our work in literature in English. So yes, thank you everyone. Thanks for joining. I hope you found this enough informative, and I look forward to seeing you next time.